Now let's talk about transferring the attributes from one geometry to another. So here I have opened up my previous scene. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create another example in here. So first I'm going to create a simple grid geometry. So let me view this and let me enable the parameter of this grid, and here we can set the size that to make our grid bigger or smaller. Let me change this back to the default, and here we have the rows and columns to adjust our subdivisions of our grid. So maybe let's increase this to 100 by 100. So basically I just want to create a lot more divisions to add a lot more resolution in our grid. And in here let's create another geometry. So maybe let's create a sphere in here, polygonal sphere. Let's add this, and here we have our this lovely sphere. And now let's create the attribute. So for this one I'm going to create a color attribute. So let's add a color node in here, and let's connect this. And onto the color I'm going to creating the CD attribute onto my point level, because you know that the color node will just create a CD attribute if I middle mouse button. Here as you can see, now we have this CD, and in here we can define the color. I'm going to create a red color for our sphere, and I'm going to create another color attribute onto our this grid. Let me connect this. And for this one I'm going to make this color black, which mean R, G and B, all of these values will get a 0, which produce the black color. And we can check if we go into the geometry spreadsheet, and we need to enable the point attributes, because right now we are viewing the primitive attribute. So let's go into the point attribute, and here as you can see we have the position px, py, pz, and now we have the cd. CDR the red color, CDG green color, and B blue color. So all of these values are set to 0, which mean the black color. And sure enough, we have the black color. Let's go into our this sphere, which has a red value set to 1 and 0, all of these components. You can go into the geometry spreadsheet and check, and here you can see CDR get a value of 1 for all of our points. These are our point number, and G and B are 0. Now basically I want to transfer this red color onto my this grid, okay, which has the black color. So I can do this by creating a attribute transfer node. So if we type attribute transfer, let's add this, and it has two inputs. The first one, the geometry to transfer attributes to. So I want to transfer the attributes to my grid, and we have the attributes from. So I want to transfer this from our this sphere. So that is our from geometry. I can view the result of the attribute transfer, and here you can see our red color has been transferred to grid. Our grid was black, and after transferring, now the grid is red. I can change the color onto my this sphere. I can change this to blue, and now if I view the result, and we should see the blue color. And onto the attribute transfer, we have some parameters. In here we can define which attribute that you want to transfer. Right now we are transferring the primitive as well as the points attributes. If no attribute is selected in here, which means all of the attributes will get transferred, all of the primitive and points. But because we are only just care about the point attribute, we have the point attribute, so we can just uncheck this primitive option, and onto the points we can specifically define in here. So if you have multiple attributes and you only want to transfer certain attribute, let's say in this case I want to only transfer the CD, so I can just pick in here, and now we are exclusively telling this attribute transfer to just transfer the CD and not all of the attributes. So make sure to keep that in mind whenever you are transferring the attributes. And we can go into the condition tab. If we go in here, and we also have this option for the distance threshold. So right now the distance threshold is set to 10, which means the 10 meters, which is a very high value. So if I were to lower these values down, and here as you can see, we are effectively clamping the radius in which our this attribute get propagates in here. Let's lower this down to a value of maybe the size of sphere. And here as you can see, we have an radius of 0.5. So what I can do, I can just type in here the distance threshold to 0.5. So now only where our sphere is located, our this attribute get transferred and not all of our grid. So I can template my original geometry, and you can template your geometry if you hover over to that node and click on this option, and that will template your geometry. Okay, the templated geometry can be viewed as a wireframe, and here as you can see, we have a wireframe representation of our original templated geometry. And here as you can see, where our sphere is, we only get transferred attribute in here. So which means I can create a transform node in here. So if I add transform and connect this, and onto the transform, if I play around with the position, let's say I want to adjust the X position, and right now our templated geometry is not moving because we are templating our this original color and not this transform. So let me untemplate this and template this transform node. Okay, so that we have visual feedback where our sphere is. So now if I can adjust the position, and here as you can see, wherever our sphere is located, our these attributes get transferred. That is a very powerful technique for creating all sorts of different effects. So which mean what I can do, I can create a random extrusion value in here. For example, let me remove this color attribute from here, or maybe just duplicate this all of this setup. Select all of these node, press and hold the Alt key to drag, and let's remove this wire, we don't need this. And onto this one, let's remove the color attribute. But let's say we want to create a random attribute onto our these primitives. So in here I'm going to create a attribute randomize. So let's add this. And by the way, if you add an attribute randomize and you do not have attribute, let's say on top we do not have an ACD attribute, here as you can see we only have P, and if we create an attribute randomize, it will create the attribute as well as randomize these values. So here as you can see, now we have the CD attribute. So which means that this node is creating the attribute if the attribute does not exist. So which means I can just type the attribute that I want to create. So I'm going to create the attribute my attrib. So let's name this my attrib, and if we middle mouse button, and here as you can see we have the my attrib, and we want this to onto the primitive level. So let's change the class from point to primitive, and now if I middle mouse button, and now we have the primitive attribute my attrib, and it should have random value. We can go into the geometry spreadsheet and onto the primitive, and here as you can see right now it has 3 values. So right now it is an if vector. So we can define this in here onto the dimension. The right now dimension is set to 3, which means we are creating the 3 values. Okay, vector attribute 0, 1 and 2. And if I were to change the dimension to 1, and here as you can see now we only have one attribute my attribute, which means now it should have a float attribute. So if I have middle mouse button, and here as you can see, sure enough we have the my attribute and it's a float attribute, and it's also have random value, which is nice. Now let's transfer this attribute onto our this geometry where we were driving the extrusion right here. So I'm going to just maybe create another rubber toy geometry in here. So let's add a rubber toy, and let's remove all of the attribute that currently this default geometry has by creating an attribute delete node. And in here, I'm going to click delete non-selected to remove all of the attributes. And in here, I'm going to create an attribute transfer node. Let's add an attribute transfer. And we have this attribute transfer node in here. We just need to connect this. So onto the attributes, now we want to transfer this primitive attribute myAttrib. So first let me connect this because that is the geometry where I want to transfer the attribute, and right now it's throwing a warning. So here we have the warning sign, and that is because it can't find the CD attribute, and that's fine because we do not have CD attribute. So let's go in here and uncheck the CD, enable the primitive attribute because we only care about the primitive, and maybe let's explicitly tell that we want to transfer the myAttrib. And now if I template this geometry, so wherever we have the sphere, let me adjust the position of the sphere, we should start to get some random values for the extrusion. So if we go into the myAttrib and let's go into the geometry spreadsheet, primitive, and here you can see most of them have a value of 0, and we can click on this to sort. And right now, and here you can see we are starting to get some values. We have some random values and we are transferring them. Let's go into the scene view, and now let's create another poly extrude node in here to drive the extrusion. Let's add this and connect this, and let me untemplate this attribute transfer and template our this sphere geometry. And onto the poly extrude, we need to change this to 1 because we know that is a multiplier, and divide individual elements. We want to extrude all of these individually. Let's go into the local control and enable this distance attribute. And in here, let's type the attribute, and we are going to type our attribute that is called the myAttrib. And here you can see we have the extrusion happening. Let me lower down this scale value, and we have some of these distance problems, so we can go into the attribute transfer and onto the condition. Let's lower down this distance threshold to keep it close wherever our sphere is. Let me keep lowering this distance threshold value down. Let's keep lowering this down, and there you go. And here you can see where we have the sphere, we have the extrusion, which means I can go into the transform and I can just keep moving this sphere. Let me adjust this, and here you can see we have the extrusion. Another thing that we can do, we can select the node. So when the node is selected in the node editor, the transform node, hover over to the viewport and press enter. And what that will do, it will activate the manipulator tool. So now we have these handles to move our sphere for the selected node. So now I can use these viewport handles to place my sphere. And here you can see wherever my sphere is, we have the extrusion because we are transferring the attributes. So transferring the attributes is a very powerful way of controlling your effect, and it is quite useful.